Hi, this is Dan Stamnis, and I'm one of the Primavera P6 EPPM implementation specialists and trainers here at TEPCO, located in Baytown, Texas. Today we're going to talk about using Oracle Team Member in the oil and gas industry, primarily for doing progress updates. There is a timesheets component to enter actual hours, but that's not going to be part of this video because it's difficult to get timesheet hours down to the activity level in this industry. Regarding the applications involved, we're going to talk about the P6 web. We have to go into the P6 web in order to set up some preferences on a project as to how the team member tool will work. We'll also be looking at the P6 Professional, and that's just to go into our normal P6 and see what team member has done after we've entered some progress. And then of course I'll be giving you some detail on team member itself. And here are the three applications that we're going to be looking at. The P6 Web in order to set up some preferences, P6 Professional so we can see the results of our status entry, and team member. I'm going to go into the P6 Professional client to show you a few things first. In here I've set up three projects. The first one's called TM1. This is the first example I'm going to show when we open team member. But I want to point out I've copied that project and created a what if. It's very important if you do copy a project and create a what if, or you copy a project just for backup purposes, you must open the project and change the status on the project to what if, inactive, or planned. The reason is if you make a copy of your current active project and you leave the copy as active, that is also going to be made visible inside team members, so they will see duplicate activities. So it's very important if you're a master scheduler and you intend on using team member that you get used to changing the status field right here on a project when you make a copy. In the activities view for this example, I put in three activities, A, B, and C. And I wanted to point out a few other fields here that I've added to my view. You may have not used some of these fields before. The first one here is an activity code, and I'm going to show you how that's used in team member, along with a user-defined field for notes. I've also added a field here for a user-defined field to enter % complete, and I'll explain the purpose in that later. The field that may be new to you is this one called owner. Owner is technically an activity code, but it utilizes the P6 users as the code values. If you click in here, it will bring up the P6 user list. You can assign who is supposed to be the person that owns that activity. Now this person has a P6 login ID and a license, and they should be licensed to log into team member. If I assign team lead 1, that means that when team lead 1 opens up team member, they should see these two activities here. The team lead number 2, who is another user, opens up team member, they should see this one activity. Access to team member and the activities that are associated can also be assigned by a resource or the primary resource. So they could open up team member as a resource and be able to see the activities they are assigned to and enter status. This is typically only used in named resource companies, IT industries. We don't see it too much in the oil and gas industry because the oil and gas industry is more craft based. We look at pipe fitters and boilermakers, forklift drivers, and scaffolders. We don't necessarily put real people's names in as our resources, and we certainly don't give them access to a web interface or even P6 to go in and enter status. We usually leave that for team leads or unit coordinators. Now I'm in the P6 web. If you're not used to seeing this, it is sort of set up like P6. Although it's a web interface, it has a lot more functionality inside of it that we typically don't use in our industry. There are tabs at the top here, one's for dashboards, next for portfolios, and then another one for projects and another one for resources. If you're intending on using team member as a status update tool, you'll want to go to the projects tab. Once you're inside the projects tab, you can right click on a project. There is an option to select set project preferences. We need to do this because you can set the project preferences for team member different on each individual project. Inside the project preferences on the left side, there are some options here, and you want to go down to the bottom one and select team member. Inside this window, you're going to see three tabs for status updates, activity updates, and status reviews. Team members are assigned to activities can be set as resource assignments, activity owners or primary resources, or both. We're going to set it as activity owners / primary resources. I will explain a little bit about the other options when I take you to the administrator section of the P6 web. You can also select the fields that team members can update. So there's resource assignment fields and there's activity fields. This demonstration is going to focus only on activity statusing. We're not going to go in and update any resource assignment specific information. However, if you were in an environment where you were capturing actual units, you could give them the ability to go in and enter actual hours. The other options include remaining units and remaining duration. Since I'm not going to be using these, I can actually remove them from their view. So when a team member user logs in, I can control what is in their view. So I'm going to remove these. The activity field side, you may be in an environment where they update the activity percent complete, or in an environment where they update the remaining duration, or maybe you give them the option to do either one. Usually I would limit this to one or the other, but I'm going to leave both in there so that you can see what it looks like when we get into team member. I'm going to move over to the Activity Updates tab. Here there are some options. Team members can assign themselves to activities. In this environment, we don't want them to do that. Team members can add and delete steps. Probably don't need that to happen. I'm not going to be showing you any steps inside team member. If you are using steps in your industry, you could consider turning that option on. Team members can update notebooks. So if there is a notebook field that you generally want them to be able to update, you can provide that for them. Down here, it provides you an option as to which activity codes or user-defined fields you would like to have displayed in team member when they log in. This gives them the option to update these fields, or you can just set them as read-only so they can only see the fields as a reference. In this example, I've set up a code called TA delay cause. Basically, if an activity is not finishing on time, the team member user can go in and set a code value against that as to why it's not getting done. Maybe they're waiting on a permit, maybe they're waiting on scaffold. It depends on what values you put into this code when you build it in P6. And then there's a user-defined field for percent complete, and there's a user-defined field for notes. The reason there is a user-defined field for percent complete is because I've been in some environments where they do not want a team member user updating the percent complete directly in P6. They would rather have them put the number inside a user-defined field, and then the master scheduler will review those and run a global change and transfer those over to the actual activity percent complete field. It's kind of a gate process there to make sure that the master scheduler can review the updates before they actually apply them. However, there is another option for that, and it's called status reviews. You can set up another user who is required to approve the status before it actually gets applied within P6. This could actually be the master scheduler, or it could be another person. In named user environments or named resource environments, it's typically a resource manager that might go in and look at a person's timesheet hours before they actually approve them for the week. You can do the same thing here, so you could have a person that logs in and looks at the status of the activities that have been already statused by the other users, like the coordinators or team leads, and they can do a final approval on it before it actually gets applied to P6. So this is another way to put a gate on the status actually getting applied within P6. Before I move into team member, there's a few other things you need to know inside the P6 web. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close this window. So I have set up our preferences for how team member will get used against this project right here. Remember, it is project by project, so you would have to do that for other projects if they're new. Now I want to take you up to the Administer dropdown, and I want to go look at User Access. Now, unless you're a P6 administrator using the EPPM P6 web, you may not have access to this, but it's a good idea to have an understanding of how it works. I've set up some users in here, including myself. There's an admin, and then here's the Team Lead 1 and Team Lead 2. Team leads and any user inside the system can actually be assigned to a resource in the system, but it can only be one user per resource. So we're just going to use activity codes in the end and filters, and we're going to set the owner on each activity. So it's important, like I was mentioning earlier, that the owner field within P6 needs to be populated. This is the primary code that is needed to make sure that the activities show up in a particular supervisor's or team lead's team member view. Now, when you set up a new user and you want them to access data through team member, they have to be licensed to use that tool. When the user is set up, you can click on them and you can come down to the bottom here and you can select which applications or modules they get access to. Team Lead 1 may only need access to Team Member, but they will need at least access to Team Member. Usually when I'm working turnarounds, I like to get status anywhere from 15 to 20 team leads. I'm not a big fan of getting status from the companies directly. However, there are cases where the scaffold company probably has a lead that's watching over all of the scaffold builders, and I could rely on them to provide me the status. But when it comes to actually getting status for jobs during turnarounds, I prefer to see a coordinator that's in charge of all exchangers or a subset of exchangers, and that one person is responsible for updating all activities on that particular job. Now I'm going to log into Team Member, which is also a web interface, and I'm going to log in as that Team Lead 1. And inside here you'll see two of the activities that I had previously set the owner to be Team Lead 1 on. So I'll go back to P6, and Activity A and Activity B are set to Team Lead 1. If I took Activity C and changed that to be Team Lead 1, I need to commit changes, and I'll go back to Team Member, and I'm just going to right click and refresh. Now all three activities are there. So regarding the layout, I'm just going to go through the different areas within this view. At the top here we have some filtering options to see all projects, or just the ones that can specifically, if this person were assigned to 2 or 3 specific projects, or they just wanted to look at only one of them, they can certainly set it for that. If they were on 2 or 3 other projects right now, they would possibly see activities from 2 or 3 different projects here. Status, that's the status of the activity. So is it an active activity, due, overdue, completed, or starred? Starred is actually just a little flag over here. I'll talk about that again in a minute. Time frame. We don't have a lot of specific filtering options in here, so you could list all the activities, which would generally create a large list if you're working in turnarounds, capital projects, or maintenance. I could show just the activities that are scheduled for today, or scheduled for tomorrow, or this week. We don't have the ability to set a specific, say, 36-hour look-ahead filter in here, so we will have to just rely on what the options are here, which is typically today or tomorrow or this week might be beneficial. You could limit it to the activities, which resources are assigned to the activities. So I only want to see activities with resource B assigned. Or let's say I was working as a scaffold company and they also provided insulation resources, but I only wanted to update my scaffold resource activities at this point in time. I could select just the scaffold resource and then maybe come back and filter for the insulation resource, so I could just focus on insulation separately. And then there's some sort by options, so task ID, task name, the project ID, project name, start date, and finish date. Typically I would use start date so that it waterfalls based on start. Here's a little bit more about the filtering options at the top in Team Member, specifically the status drop-down and the time frame drop-down. You need to be aware that due and overdue are actually reading from the system date. So they are not reading from any sort of P6 baseline. So if it's due, that means it's due today or within the time frame that you've selected. And if it's overdue, that means that it is due today. You want to make sure you have a clear understanding of how these two work, and just be aware that it is not referencing the baseline. It's basically just referencing the system time against these dates right here. Next, we have the activity list. When you click on an activity, there's a window over on the right that shows data for that specific activity. There's a start button that you can click here. And there's also a finish checkbox, so I could just mark the activity as completely finished immediately. Or I can start it, and then I'm going to have to put a % complete on it, which means I have to come over here to the right side and actually put in what the % complete is. I mentioned earlier that I was going to leave both fields on for % complete and remaining duration. So you could also adjust the remaining duration instead if your environment does that. Some companies like to adjust remaining duration, other companies like to just enter % complete. I'll click on Activity C. I'm going to go ahead and start that, and I will put 25% on that. Now, some other things you can look at on each activity. You can look at a button called Related Tasks. That's going to show you the predecessors and successors. I'm not seeing any predecessors here because Activity A does not have any. I'm going to jump down to B. So I can see what's supposed to happen before this activity and what's supposed to happen after it based on the logic that has been applied inside of P6. You can also show the project. You can include the project ID up here as well and the WBS that it resides in. Here's the start and finish dates. There is a discussion button here, so I will enter some feedback here. And I'll show you how that's going to work. I'm going to post it, so I hit the post button. And this actually does timestamp it. Right now it says in an hour, but it will turn into a timestamped view as time goes on. It reads off of the system. I'm going to go ahead and close this. You can email someone information about the activity if you needed to, and it will actually open up your email, which happened on my other screen. And it just gives the basic information here. So it really doesn't give much other than the activity ID and name, project, and the WBS, but you can use that to shoot someone an email if you need to. And then there's also this star flag right here, so you can mark a task as starred if you needed to. Maybe you need to come back to it because you didn't get proper status from the field, so you need to go and make some phone calls or go talk to some people. Now, if you're a P6 user and this is your first time seeing team member, there's one thing that we have to get used to, and that's that there is a save button up here. When someone does make changes in this view, we do have to save it. You'll notice the activity that was marked as completed that actually fell off of the view. It's not going to appear anymore because it's not an open activity. Okay, let's move on to the right-hand side here. I do have a started field here, so I can actually change the date that the activity actually started. We have a finish by field. Once I mark it as completed, I can set when the activity actually finished. Just like in P6, if you do mark it as finished, it will automatically update the percent complete to 100% and it will drop the remaining duration down to 0. There is this button right here to status other resources. So if there are multiple resources on the activity, this is where you could actually enter actual hours or remaining duration against a resource. We turn those options off in the project settings when we are in the P6 web and we right-clicked on the project and set up the preferences for this. But this is where that would show up, and you could actually specifically enter the remaining duration for a specific resource. And in our environment, we do use multiple resources on an activity. So we may have safety watches and cranes supporting our welders or our pipe fitters. Maybe we want to update them individually. You do actually have the ability to do that if you turn that on. Now down here, codes and UDFs, these are the 3 fields that we told in our project preferences that we wanted the team member users to see. So we have the delay cause, we have units percent complete, which is just a number or text field, and then we have the notes field. So in here in delay cause, I did set up some code values so they could click in there and they could say we're waiting on materials. Assign the code, and that will end up getting applied back in P6. I'll go ahead and put some information into the user defined field. So this activity is 50%, and then UA notes. Now I'm not sure if a notes field would be of value as a user defined field. You can, like I mentioned earlier, turn on the notebook fields for them to use as well. But you also have this discussion button, which might accommodate what you need when it comes to communicating back and forth between, say, the master scheduler and the person entering status. I have made some more changes, so I need to remember to hit the save button up here on the right. And when I'm all done, I'm just going to come up here, hit this drop down, and I can say log out. Let's talk a little bit more about the discussion functionality. If I'm the P6 scheduler and I'm in P6 right now, I could click on an activity and there is a discussion tab that you can add in the activity details. It'll show the discussion history over on the left-hand side. As the scheduler, I can enter some questions or make some comments here, and I can hit post. And if I go back to team member, I can refresh. And you'll see that there's a 1 in here. That is an indication that there is a post to the discussion page. And if I open that, I can see what was posted. I can also respond to it. Then I hit post. When I come back into P6, if I've refreshed, I can now see the responses over here. So then I could respond again. Post that. and you can see it timestamps. It also indicates who the post is from. Back to team member. Need to refresh, and there's the discussion post again. Now, when we had set up the project preferences, I turned on the checkbox to have a status reviewer, someone that's going to review the status before it actually gets applied to P6. So let's go revisit that screen again in the projects view, and we'll select the project, right click, and go to set project preferences. Back to the team member button and status reviews. So I had set up the admin user account to be the status reviewer. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. I'm actually logged in to the P6 web as the admin right now, so I don't need to log back out and log in as another user. What we're going to do now is go to the activities button. There's two ways to get to the status review window. You can hit the actions drop down here on the left, and you can go review status updates. There is also a tool button right here, review status updates. So we'll go ahead and click that. And when you get in this view, you're going to see actually all three of those activities that were updated. And I have some options here. I can accept and close them, or I can switch them to be on hold, or I can override the status on them. Those two options are right here, right inside each activity. So let's say on activity B, I don't agree with the status, so I could set it to hold and I could come back to it later. Or I could click the override button and I can say, no, that's not going to be completed. We have some remaining duration that we have to do on it. And we'll remove the hold on that. And since I've overridden that, I can't actually accept it at this time with the status that I have reapplied to it. Basically, you come down and hit the accept button. That's going to accept the status on all three of these. So really what you're looking for is something that stands out, something that says, no, that just doesn't seem right. Let me follow up with that. Let me put a hold on it, or let me override it. You can also see the status discussion notes. Those are the notes that I had put in against activity B. And I could also add some notes to that as well as the approver. I'm going to go ahead and click accept. And when I accept them, they'll disappear. And then I'll go ahead and close. Now, having a status reviewer in the middle of it, having to look at every activity like that may not be convenient in your environment, so you'll have to determine if that's some sort of functionality that you want to use. You definitely don't have to use it. If you write the procedures properly for your status updaters that are going to be using team member, and if they follow the rules and they're good at putting in status, you probably don't need a gate in the middle. You can trust them to enter status against the activities directly. And of course, if you find something that is wrong as a master scheduler in P6, you can go ahead and undo the status, or remove the status or progress. It's your choice as to what kind of method you want to use there. So now that we've entered some status and it's been approved, let's go see what it looks like inside of P6. Here's our three activities. You'll notice we do not have any status yet. Everything is still unchecked as started or finished. That's because we do have to refresh. So I'm going to hit F5. Now it's been refreshed. So here's the three activities. Activity 1000, actually 1010, I meant to add some remaining duration to it, but really what I needed to do was take the finish off of it. So that one actually remained completed. And of course, like I mentioned, we could actually deprogress activities here as a master scheduler. There is the status. Here's the notes we entered against that field, the user-defined field. Here's the activity codes that were assigned in team member. This one I had signed previously. This is the one I did during the video, waiting on permit. So that's a way to let the master scheduler know why we're delayed. And you could actually use that, run a filter on that, and run some reports if you needed to take that into any sort of management meetings. And then here's the percent completes that we entered in the user defined field. So if you are using a system or a method of updating where you have them only update the user defined field, you could write a global change that takes the percent complete that they put into the user defined fields and it pushes it into the actual activity percent complete. It's not a straight global change. You can't just say activity percent complete equals the UA percent complete, because if the activity is not started, you have to tell P6 to actually mark the activity as started first. So keep that in mind if you decide to build that type of global change. To finish up this video, I'm going to walk through the basics again using a real-world type of example for a turnaround file. So I've created a turnaround file called TEPCO 2014 HCU turnaround. And if I go to the activities view, I've actually assigned the owners. I created 3 owners. One's for the scaffold company, another one is for an installation contractor, and the other one is just for a coordinator for exchangers. So I'm filtered for exchangers at the moment. So I had to go into P6 as an administrator, so into the P6 web in this case, and I had to create these users, one for scaffold. Typically this would be a real person's name, probably the foreman's name. And my layout is grouped by owner, so you can actually group and sort by the owner code. Now in the P6 web, I went to the projects tab, and here's the project, and I'm going to right click on it and go set project preferences. Go down to the team member button. I'm going to configure all the preferences for team member. So here I have it set as activity owners and primary resources, although we're not going to be using primary resources. I've also limited the fields that they can update to only activity % complete. Basically the concept here is that the company that we're working for only updates % complete. They don't update remaining duration. Regarding the activity updates field, I left these 3 checkboxes turned off, and I added one activity code for them to assign, and that's TA delay cause again. So that's the only code that they'll have available inside team member. As for status reviews, I did not enable this, so the status is going to go directly into P6 without any sort of gate process. Now I go to team member. I'm going to go ahead and sign in as the exchangers foreman. And here are the activities. And all I have to do now is go down, and if I've started an activity, if I've completed it, I just hit the checkbox. I can resort. And maybe this activity is 50% complete. We'll go ahead and say that this one is complete. And we'll put in, I'm going to do 2 things here. I'm going to say problem removing plugs, and we'll post that. And we'll go down to this one here and maybe change the code on it to say we're waiting on permit. And maybe I'll star this one. So that's really all it takes, is just to walk down through the activities and make the updates. I need to make sure I hit save, and back to P6. If I hit refresh, we will see the status updates applied to the activities. This video has been focused on using Team Member through the web application, but be aware that Team Member is also available for phones and for tablets, so Android devices or iPhones. Thanks for watching this video presented by TEPCO, located in Baytown, Texas. If you have an interest in using TEPCO for any sort of implementations or for scheduling and cost control, or if you would like training from TEPCO, please go to www.tepco.us.